Alright, so this setup seems to have the, I guess the easiest way to record on a bike next to a road with wind interference and no hands, etc. I've been less active for a couple months now, and I realized why. I started to get a little run down from eating basically rolled oats granola, thinking that it didn't have wheat in it, and sparking up immunosuppression from candida and all that. And I can't remember if that was after or before, but everything started to get kind of rough, literally like exactly during the time of the eclipse and after. And there's, literature and spoken word about the eclipse, the moon energy having excuse me, I gotta sneeze. Having the increased, I guess, activation of bacteria. It enhances bacterial growth. And so that happened, and then I realized probably 4 days ago that about 8 months ago I dropped a granite cutting board slab onto my toe, and it cracked the toe in half, or the toenail in half. And so I turned off reacting to the pain of that for a while, because I eventually, after a month or so, the broken part of the toe came off, or the toenail. And walking around there's pain and stuff, but I just and I actually wasn't riding a bike at that point, so I was walking everywhere. And it fell off, and then I guess there's still pain, and I thought it was just healing. But it had already healed, and the pain I was feeling starting about 2-3 months ago was from basically it growing into healthy skin and possibly causing an infection. Pretty much, long story short, I pretty much have a fever from a complication from that infection, and I'm dealing with that now, and that's why I realized I was pretty much reduced for a while. Thought it was just pain, but whatever. Funny thing is, I'm going to try and do a home treatment, which may or may not result in worse situation. We'll find out. Just look up toenail. What is it called? It's something. It's when they remove. Excuse me. It's when they remove the something I can't remember from medical terminology. Nailectomy or something? I think there's a different word for it though. And I think they remove too much when they do that, and they do it very rough because they numb it up, but then they just cut through with what look like garden snips basically, and that damages the nail bed and roughens things up even more, and it's possible for reinfection and stuff like that. And so, by the way, I just want to talk about a thought I had. If you read the blog and you see on Facebook, there are some recent posts on recent posts on the interdimensional parasite, the delusional interdimensional mind parasite. And so that's a good post. Check that out, about how the dreaming system becomes, how it is managed, and how it basically grows, and then how something happened to deflect that. Maybe I should talk about that instead. I'm so winded just from like a 5-minute ride. Well, I'll talk about the shorter topic first, because I know that'll take like 30 minutes that I'll ramble about it. The main thing with this situation is the capacity to remember. We are limited by what we are restricted from remembering as far as our experience in this place and the other layers go. And so that's basically the system, the matrix. If you wanted to sum it all up, it's one, there's suffering, it's induced, it's unnecessary, and two, hopefully this makeshift cotton ball works to block this wind. The seasons are changing, so the wind's going to be picking up. But there's suffering, and then there's memory loss. There's ignorance. Doesn't necessarily mean ignorance, you don't know how to count. It means we simply do not know what has happened. So basically, the solution to all of that is to become ready to change the way we respond to suffering. Kind of like a bully situation. If the person being victimized didn't act like a victim every time they were bullied, the bully wouldn't do that. It wouldn't work. Physically gets into a different structure, because what if, the person can't fight or defend themselves, the other person's bigger. But look at it from an intellectual standpoint. That if it wasn't about physicality, because all that can be solved in any way. And the idea is that if it's just words, every time the bully used words to try and one-up somebody and overcome them, and they turned it around on the bully and made fun of them, or they felt better because they learned about the situation and themselves, or they used that experience to inform the bully of how they really feel and break down, psychologically analyze the situation, the bully would A, not be a bully anymore and come to that person for the truth, figure things out and be like, wow, thank you, I never thought of it that way. Or B, they'd be a bully, but they would go somewhere else. So it's the same situation, but the idea is that's the premise, the basic understanding of the first aspect of overcoming suffering. Essentially, suffering is in the way one interprets the experience, and in that sense, it's the end result, meaning it's the way we react, and in that sense, it's whether we react, and it's an autonomous pain reflex, whether it's emotional or not, and it's primarily emotional. You can't burn your hand and be like, there's no pain, therefore it's fine. No, it doesn't work that way. It's all of this is all mental, intellectual, emotional, psychological energy concept. So the idea is, if you whether you react autonomously or whether you respond essentially with care, both to yourself and the supposed victimizer, to the point where if you don't become the victim, there is no victimizer. And that's, the nature of that process. It's required excuse me. It's required that at least one person loses energy and one person gains energy. Both can do it at the same time, but that's still an interplay. Now, if neither of the techniques work, then the one who is initially seeking to gain energy through a vampiric process, or essentially a crude process, they won't keep doing that simply because they won't have the energy required to sustain themselves in that type of relationship or situation. And so, by altering that dynamic, we overcome the issue before it is pretty much born. And there's so much that could be said there, but it's all got to be at the right time. For instance, I could talk about how some of these projects, Okay, they started at the womb. They're solving the problem before it was born. If the victim aspect was never born, then you can't be a victim. And as soon as there are no victims, there's no victimizer, and they gotta pick a new profession. And that's the next age. Complicated, I know, but just take a step back and dream about it. And so, the second part is that we have to overcome ignorance. Knowledge sets us free. There's two parts to that. Knowing how this situation works is literally kind of like our lifeblood to overcoming the tricks and traps and setbacks that keep people entrained in the same reactions, the same role playing as one who is the victim, basically seeing the agenda. And the other part is that knowledge of how that agenda has been used to manipulate us personally, psychologically, with traumas, memories, beliefs, experiences, deceptions, whatever, addictions, all that, gives us the power to overcome them. If you don't know how you're being manipulated, then it stays in the back of your mind. And if someone else has the capacity to manipulate... somebody's mowing the grass. Oh, thank you. Oh, nice. Nice means naive, stupid, so not nice, kind. Anyway, so, if you don't know, but it exists, and somebody does know, they can manipulate you unconsciously through that. Simply putting cues up throughout the day where you see words, or hear words, or people say them to you, can manipulate your mind into ooh, I need to tighten the chain and fix everything with that. Alright, manipulate your mind into aligning with behavior roles and expected outcomes, which are essentially programs that are inserted into the unconscious. And then from there, the programs in the heightened version of this, when you look at all that one can talk about with the cloning and the mind control, the result is that there are pretty much files of programs, of programmed personalities in the unconscious, the hard drive of the individual, that can then be called up and queued at will by the programmers. Technically, we all have this anyway, because that's the nature of the mind in this place. But when we let our unconscious control us, others can then control the unconscious. So, maybe the conscious. Because the unconscious isn't about control. It's just whatever's there, integrates, creates the projection of the conscious mind. Conscious mind is about the illusion of control. So if you're not on your... Ooh, man, I don't want to change another tire. Tires were blown out the other week. Oh my gosh. Anyway, tires are blown out. And there's a real kind fellow who helped me out. I wonder if he's going to see these videos now. I gotta put the review, but he said it himself, the review doesn't help him. It's all an illusion anyway. That's the message behind that. Anyway, so overcoming suffering and then overcoming the ignorance of the mind that is incapable of remembering our experiences. That is pretty much how we can navigate the labyrinth. So the final part of that is basically that we have to change the way we focus in order to, in a way, or maybe like, it's like bold, it's like engraving, or the way we record memory in our brain cells. And even then, when you do it that way, it's recorded outside your brain in a holographic field, and it's in a way that's less corruptible And in information technology, there is a term, redundancy. It has reduced redundancy. It's actually high redundancy, excuse me, but it's reduced failure rates. Meaning, it records over and over, like 3 different layers, so that if one fails, it's failure proof because it can use the other layers. Same as computing, we have to do that with our memory, with our mind, in the moment, in order to negate this automatic mind wiping system which is running 24/7. Now you might think it's, in a way, you focus and strain really hard, cross your eyes, and you're thinking about everything that happens as it happens, and you're doing it over and over again in your head. The important part here is that it's not a stressful doing. It's not a strain. It's not a physical process. And so it is more of a... well, that didn't work. More of a technique than it is something that we have to use like our muscles to achieve, even if it's consciousness and restraining. That's not how it's achieved. It's a technique, and when you learn the technique, it's a way of focusing your mind so that it's, in a way, being sure, absolutely sure of what you're experiencing, and that you are aware of what you're experiencing, and that you can store the memory properly. It's kind of like creating a feedback cycle, a feedback loop of what you experience as you're experiencing it, to the point where you're acknowledging what you're experiencing as you acknowledge it and experience it, and you're acknowledging that you acknowledge it, and you're creating these multiple layers parallel of processing the information as you watch yourself do this. When you learn to do that in a specific way, you eventually store the information differently. You may have heard with the cloning and the mind control of one-track mind and the inability to focus and remain present. That's just an extended version of what humans have, of what humanity has, the human condition. The idea is that it's hard to describe. But you basically put it that way. The other way is when you do this enough, or simply observe enough, then you'll notice, before you noticed the first time, that you're forgetting, that some things are being censored from your mind. So maybe we'll break it down in 3 quick parts before I pass out. First, we're in a state of ignorance. You don't know you're in ignorance when you're in ignorance. Then you have to observe, and you'll understand you're in ignorance. Analyze now. Analyze, or more so observe and acknowledge what's being removed, or that there is something being removed, and then observe with the intent to acknowledge the act of observation and the acknowledgement, in that way kind of super recording your experience. When you do that enough, things will begin to become apparent that were seemingly not there before, but technically would have to have been there the whole time. And that's when you realize you're kind of overcoming the script, which is more or less a manipulation, a psychological manipulation that is happening to everyone. That's part of the big secret. It's not that sorry. MK Ultra is a recent process, and some shady group began to do something to the world. It's been happening since our species has been here. Or, well, technically not like that, but it's been happening for a very long time. It's been happening since before the civilization. So that's the whole point, that it's not something new by overcoming this. It's something that's been here for centuries and millennia. But in that sense, everyone's involved, and everyone can overcome it if they learn how to focus in certain ways. Alright, thank you. Sorry that the sound has a little bit of interference from my chain on the bike and a little bit of wind. I still haven't perfected that. It doesn't help that I organized it basically right before, pretty much on the bike on the way of recording. And then it tapers off at the end because I'm pretty much like running out of oxygen to speak. Maybe it's carbon dioxide if everything's backwards. It's partially. CO2 increases or brain power increases. What I was saying, and it tapers off. And then 5 minutes ago I wanted to add to it. I couldn't remember what I added to it, but that's reflexive on what I was talking about as far as memory. And of course, I remembered it. Not really, of course, but I remembered it. And so then, of course, I want to talk about how pretty much I learned to use my mind properly, more accurately, and this allows one to acknowledge what has to be acknowledged in order to understand what is happening here and where we are. And it takes a little bit of time. It takes time. And more so effort and focus, and it's how it's how we were. If we're not able to remember what we were talking about or what we wanted to say earlier, it means something else is distorting our memory, our consciousness, filtering, because that at a higher level or extension means that the entire reality that we're aware of is the end result is filtered and distorted from what it actually is. There are two things that I remember that I want to say as well before that. Is, the process that I'm trying to describe is what enables one to remember. So as well, it's a self-checking process that you're literally continually checking yourself throughout the day or night. And everything that occurs, every experience, every event, which is part of this construct, these experiences that we perceive, they're not what's actually happening. Other things are happening, and they're being translated as what we perceive. This is a surface layer interaction, and but the idea is, at every point, at every node along the way, you pause and self-check yourself, or introspect. But it's a little bit different than introspect. It's more integrative, as if there's a protocol that you run through in a list to determine or discern which is your perceptual filtration system and what is behind that, which is really, in a way, formless and is based on kind of a fundamental underlying system. And so you got to develop your own way of checking the translation capacity of your consciousness in order to filter out what is trying to filter everything out and distort everything, which is developed by trauma in the childhood and the ways that we're basically unconsciously programmed by both this realm and this, what we call society or civilization. The unconscious memes passed through civilization or society, which are pretty much like autonomous viral programs that pretty much propagate themselves by, in a way, infecting, but reproducing and passing themselves between host mind to host mind. And from there you can even see how, well, if you learn how these systems operate, well, you can insert something into the cognitive sphere of society that will then battle different viral programs. And you have, magnify that by 1,000, you have what's really going on in society. It's not people running around, it is on a surface level, but it's really these unconscious and cognitive, intellectual, more so not cognitive, but like these intellectual etheric energies, life forms in energetic format that are really running the show. And passing around between subculture or nation, through TV, media, so on. So the idea is you just want to break down what is pretty much being passed around through your unconscious, and to acknowledge and become aware of what is being used and applied, or what is simply occurring to you in a way that is more or less manifesting your reality. It's happening either way. If you were to go and shut it all off, well, this whole place would disappear. That's how it runs. You can't have a clean version where there's no manipulation, but that's what that's what I got a notification. That's what it's hard to determine what that would be, because as soon as you remove
these manipulation systems, these projection systems that rely on manipulation, we begin to see a limitless nature of the possibilities, and everything that we use in this realm to determine what's happening is based upon boundary and limitation. So, anyway, it's just, it wouldn't be a bad thing. You know, the worst would be like a place that we can't change anything ever. That's hell, not one where it's just whatever happens. Anyway, so what I remembered and what I wanted to say was that, and I was, you know, it was reinforced by the fact that I remembered it, which I've been able to keep, not in check, but to keep up the efficiency in regards to remembering since writing and transferring this information to the public, although I've always used certain techniques and things like that. It gets exponentially more difficult when one is exposed to the truth. And it's because the innate nature of this condition is deception. And the deception is, like I said, based upon this labyrinth-like organization of perceptual illusions, and that relies on suffering, fear, and ignorance, forgetfulness. So the other thing that I remembered was that, or at least that I want to talk about, is that I think the second or final part of what I was saying before is that by, how did I say it? It was, I guess, the checking and focusing so that we set up the printing of our own awareness in wherever, you know, brain, or it's really not in the brain but outside in this field, how making it so that that is recorded in a way that is less corruptible, or the end result, what is this whole thing is about, is an incorruptible form, which is what humanity moves into, where at that point you can't trick people. But the idea is you can get a less corruptible version now by formatting your memory properly, by, it's not, you know, by formatting your awareness properly in a certain way so that it is recorded in a certain way. But, you know, what does that mean? You, like, hold your brain in a angle? It's a posture that's internal, and it's the way you focus yourself. It's kind of like crossing your eyes without actually crossing your eyes. I want to go more into that, but I don't really have anything prepared to describe that properly, and it is one of the ancient arts. What can I say here? I'll come back to that probably in another video. Maybe I'll talk about the longer recording. And I mean, if this was a 5-minute video, once again, and a 30-minute, then the video that I said I might do will probably be like an hour. But, maybe not. The other aspect now, which I'm finally getting to for 8 minutes, is that, the act of, okay, so you have these systems that, so we're checking ourselves to both record properly so that it's not wiped away, or at least not easily, to the point where attempting to wipe something away then brings up the error notices or the alerts so that you know something's happening. It makes the act of wiping it away more visible than if nothing happened. You know, you make it more difficult to be manipulated, and then at that point something else has to occur in order for manipulation to occur, and that's where you get these layers of protocols that are used to defend, and this whole system is many layers deep in those. You know, and anyway, and the idea is that, say then you find something that is a source of manipulation. So how does one let go of certain, you know, manipulations? The main idea is that by acknowledging where there is an attachment towards fear, addiction, suffering, trauma, basically, the act of acknowledging that there's a connection there is the process of liberation, because it's based on ignorance. the mind wipe, forgetfulness, the manipulation from that is based upon the attachment to suffering, and by being ignorant of the cause of the suffering, the cycle perpetuates. It's like a button that can be continually pressed by putting those cues or triggers anywhere in the world or in our life experience. And so, our projection experience. And so, if we make the connection between the cause and the suffering and remove the ignorance and acknowledge the suffering, it breaks that cycle. I don't really understand why, but it's just, I guess the information is translated from the conscious to the unconscious, or the conscious to the unconscious to the conscious. And when the two are in sync, and they basically, it's like, one produces a readout and they both produce readouts and they both read out the same information, it's as if at that point the manipulations don't work, or they're completely obvious to both layers. And at that point, if it's visible, it's an action being accepted and done by you. Say somebody's poking you or something with a thumbtack. All right, if you turn around and look for him and you can't see him and you don't know anybody's there, and you just ignore it because, all right, well, what does that mean? And you keep getting poked, and at night you wake up and somebody's poking you. All right, so now if you make it so that you can see the person, or however that's going to work. Say you look far or you look intently enough, and you realize there's somebody there poking you, and then you go back and realize the suffering is connected to this person here. If you don't do anything at that point, then it literally means you're okay with whatever's happening. If you're okay with whatever's happening, it still nullifies that suffering aspect, because if you're truly suffering, then you're going to do something about the problem. So once you know on both levels, the invisible becomes visible, it's no longer something happening to you, it's wrapped up in your causality. And once you have control of that, it's no longer connected to the same manipulation cycle. And this goes deep, again, in multiple layers of manipulation. For instance, some of the groups that took it upon themselves to participate in that other side of the process and become the harborers of that suffering in a way, and in order to gain that power. Well, then they become sadistic if that's not balanced and kept in check enough. And we have this cycle now where some of the groups of humanity become incorporated with these archontic systems. And everything can be returned to balance as well, by the way. And so, that's the idea, that acknowledgement of whatever it is that is taking place, the manipulation, the forgetfulness, basically just reality, just acknowledgement of reality. It breaks the cycle because it relies on ignorance and suffering being connected as a manipulation factor. That's just something I wanted to say. And how to focus. There's a way to look at how to focus properly. Basically, one thing I can say before I end this video is that think of it like an echo chamber, where your mind is processing out information. And if you have an emission of, brain activity, and you then look at what you just emitted in the process of still moving forward in time, and then you go back and look at the influence of what you just saw in the fact that you're acknowledging what you just saw. You have like a 3-layer echo chamber, or a kind of like trails with visuals, or an echo delay on audio, and basically you're creating that delay loop, feedback loop. If you do that, basically any distortions will have to influence 3 layers now instead of just 1. That's kind of along the lines of how to begin to complexify, or more so secure your own thought process, your own consciousness, in order to provide redundancy against external distortions or manipulations. This is one layer of it. It goes on many ways. I'm extremely tired. I was like passing out. I had to eat outside. It's like 90 degrees outside. It was cool for a couple of weeks. People are already showing like head colds and stuff because of the temperature change. I feel like I'm about to pass out now. I'm trying to keep everybody updated. This is like the happiest I can be right now, because I haven't made a video in so long, and even now I'm so tired. But yeah, think about that stuff. Check out the blog post. I always usually copy it to Facebook, one before the other. Anyway, no copyright But yeah, check it out. I'll probably try and do something about the other video and get some rest. Alright, maybe not rest, but recuperation.